Okay, I realize I haven't done one of these in a while, but it's that time of year and the tax man cometh. But now that's out of the way. So, I want to talk about a topic that I've been meaning to get to for a while now. Rom the Spaceknight was a toy robot that first hit store shelves back in 1979, but had its origins rooted in the events of 2 years earlier. What happened then? In short, this happened. Well, not actually that, but the action figures that followed. Toymaker Hasbro was making a killing off of Star Wars action figures, and naturally everybody wanted a piece of the action. So in 1978, Parker Brothers, makers of such board games as Monopoly, Clue, and one of my favorites, Stop Thief, decided it was time to get in on the action and make an actual toy. After the massive success of the first Star Wars movie, naturally everybody wanted a piece of the pie. What Parker Brothers came up with was a toy robot co-created by Scott Dankman, Richard C. Levy, and Brian L. McCoy, originally named COBOL, after a computer programming language, and later renamed Rom Spaceknight. Rom came with some pretty cool gadgets to fight evil with. He had an analyzer, a neutralizer, and, to borrow a page right out of Gene Roddenberry's playbook, a universal translator. Even though Rom was kind of cool looking, he was fairly rigid and didn't have many points of articulation, but he also had a bigger problem. Rom was so poorly thought out that the toy's packaging just came with a picture of him on the front with the words, Advanced Electronic Toy. No, I'm not making that up. But Rom also suffered from a larger problem. By this time, millions of kids were fully immersed in the Star Wars universe. Where Star Wars action figures were hot sellers because you can reenact your favorite scenes from the film with them, Rom didn't have the benefit of a film, or a cartoon, or any sort of history for that matter. Really, he didn't have so much as a bad guy he could fight. Rom didn't have any backstory. He really didn't have any story. An early commercial tried to fill in some of the gaps by claiming that Rom was one of the knights of something called the Soul Star Order, who had been ambushed by the quote-unquote evil magicians known as the Dire Wraiths, and that Rom had tracked the Dire Wraiths to Earth. Not exactly inspiring, but it was better than nothing. So, you have a toy robot by a board game company that's never sold a toy before, with not so much as a bad guy to battle. So, what do you do? In 1979, Parker Brothers licensed the character to Marvel Comics. Marvel was tasked with making Rom more interesting. The series, with art by Sal Buscema and written by Rocket Raccoon creator Bill Mantlo, fully fleshed out Rom's backstory. In the comic, Rom comes from a utopian society called Galador. Locked in an ongoing war with their enemies, the Dire Wraiths, Galador's ruler, the Prime Director... Wait a minute, that sounds awfully familiar. Anyway, the Prime Director asks for volunteers to be turned into cyborgs called Space Knights in order to fight the Dire Wraiths, with their body parts preserved and restored later when the war was over. Rom was the first volunteer, and he was transformed into what appeared to be a giant silver robot. Armed with his neutralizer, he could send the Dire Wraiths to the dimension known as Limbo. Over 1,000 other Galadorians were inspired by Rom's example, and also volunteered to undergo the process. After the Space Knights stop the invasion, Rom tails them back to their homeworld, where they panic, launch a counterattack, and scatter themselves throughout the universe. Rom, feeling responsible, vows to not reclaim his humanity until all the Wraiths were hunted down. Even with the Marvel Comics tie-in, the toy sold poorly, moving only between 200,000 and 300,000 units. It was so bad, in fact, that in the December 10th, 1979 issue of Time magazine, writer John Scow said of Rom, "Rom is a spaceman doll whose computer memory gives it a disappointingly narrow range of behavior. It breathes heavily, one of its better effects, buzzes, twitters, and flashes its lighted eyes, and sounds ominous gongs, one for good, two for evil." The trouble with this Parker Brothers homunculus is that it looks as it should be able to use its arms and legs like a true robot, and it can't. Rom will end up among the dust balls under the playroom sofa. Ouch. Co-creator McCoy blamed Parker Brothers for Rom's failure as a toy on poor marketing and poor packaging. The comic, while not a huge success, did enjoy quite a long run at Marvel from 1979 until the end of its run in 1986, where Rom eventually reclaimed his humanity and the character continued to bounce around the Marvel Universe for some time afterwards as a fan favorite. In 2001, Marvel published a miniseries called Space Knights, where it was said that Rom, even though he's never mentioned by name, had taken the name Artur, possibly inspired by his encounter with King Arthur's ghost. Marvel at the time no longer had the rights to use Rom or his likeness in a comic, but they still had the rights to use the name Space Knights. Marvel got around this by having his ship off-panel fall under attack, after which Rom is presumed dead. It would seem for a time that Rom was primed for a comeback, when in 2012, before the Marvel event Age of Ultron, where he appeared in a piece of preview art only in a slightly different form. Possibly after fearing legal action, Marvel changed his name from Rom to Icon, one of the other Space Knights they still had the rights to. Also in that year, Hasbro filed a new trademark for Rom, and he made his debut as a Transformer. Not quite what I was hoping for, but better than nothing, I guess. Due to disputes over the rights to the character, Marvel has been unable to reprint him in trade paperback form, and has gone as far as even completely removing him from other stories. Rom's appearance from Hulk's regression storyline were heavily edited, as well as his entry from the Secret Wars 2 Omnibus. In 2014, the first issue of Rom's comic was recreated with the help of fans in order to assist Bill Mantlow's long-term healthcare costs after he sustained a permanent brain injury in a car crash in 1992. More importantly than Rom's history as a failed toy and a moderately successful comic is what he's done in terms of character development for many lesser properties. Marvel took a character that was essentially a blank slate, and not only made him interesting, but also made him enduring, and also made him a fan favorite in the process. It was a formula that Marvel would repeat in the 80s, with 2 more licensed properties from Hasbro. In 1981 with G.I. Joe, and in 1984 with Transformers. Something Marvel would also do for the character Firestar in their 1986 limited series. One of Rom's most prominent fans includes director James Gunn, who wanted to use the Space Knight in Guardians of the Galaxy, but unfortunately wasn't allowed to because Marvel and Disney still don't own the rights to the character. There's rumors that Rom may appear in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but nothing has been confirmed yet. For now, Rom's legacy will endure on the internet. But hey, if our favorite space raccoon and walking tree can star in a major motion picture, I'm sure there's room for our favorite Space Knight too. See you next time.